Hello everybody and welcome. This is the 7th Google Hangout session of the Pixel Project's 2nd annual fall edition of Read for Pixels campaign. My name is Anisha Kandasivam and I will be your moderator for this session. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 12 award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign. We aim to raise $1 million. The funds will be shared between the USA's National Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the Pixel Project so that we both can keep up our efforts to end violence against women. Now we have a really great treat for us today. We have best-selling author Kate Elliott. Kate is an acclaimed science fiction and fantasy author of the Spirit Walker series and the Court of Fives. And here she is. Hello, Kate.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Okay, so Kate, before we go on to your reading, I have to tell people about the swag that you've donated to the Pixel Project. So Kate has donated a lot of amazing goodies to us, and we are giving them away on our Indiegogo page. So here's what she has donated. The first thing is Drabbles, which are written based on a donor's prompt for up to 3 donors. There are 3, but actually one has been taken up already, so there's only 2 left. So each donor gets 1 Drabble, and they get to choose which of Kate's worlds the Drabble will be set in. The second thing is a 1,000-word piece of flash fiction for 1 lucky donor. And again, the donor will get to pick which of Kate's world the story is set in. Third one is a signed first edition hardcover of Kate's new young adult book, Court of Fives, which is brand new, just came out. And the fourth thing is a signed advanced reader's copy of Black Wolves, which is Kate's upcoming epic fantasy. Now this goodie has already been snapped up, unfortunately, but there's so much more. And I will be telling you how you can get your hands on them a little later in the session and how you can help the cause and how you can donate. Okay, so Kate is now going to do a reading, and Kate and I will then have a short discussion about the characters in her novels and about strong female characters in storytelling. And then there will be a Q&A section where the audience, you guys, can ask Kate all kinds of questions. Now, there are 2 ways to ask Kate questions. The first is if you are watching this on Google Hangout, you will see a Q&A box pop up on the right side of your screen. You can type your questions in there, and I will read them out to Kate, and she will answer them. The second way is if you are watching this on YouTube right now, you can type your questions out in the comment section below the video, but you have to be signed into Google in order to do this. Okay, so here is what all you guys have been waiting for. Kate is going to do a reading from Black Wolves. Her upcoming epic fantasy is not even out yet. Are you ready, Kate?
I am ready. So should I just start?
Yeah, just start.
All right. So this is the cover. Am I holding it right? Of Black Wolves. It'll be out in November 3rd. It's the beginning of a new epic fantasy trilogy. And I'm going to actually read 2 sections from it. One's a little longer and one's fairly short. And I'm going to start with a section about a character named Danara. Danara is a woman in her 50s. She's a Reeve, which will be described. You'll figure out what that is from the story. Okay. Wind rumbling in her ears, Danara soared over the West Hall Hills, scouting for the escaped prisoners. Even after 40 years as a Reeve, patrolling never got old. High above the land, the wind in her face, and the sun in her heart. Reeves did not sit astride eagles, of course. Hitched in front, they dangled as from the bird's breastbone, and thus had the land laid out below their feet. There was very little a Reeve could not see from the air, and nothing that blocked her vision, except her own blindness, her own fears. her own secret desires and thwarted aspirations. Danara rained terror into a circling pattern. Together with a company of king's spears, she and her wing of 9 reeves had tracked the fleeing criminals through Sardia to these rugged, uninhabited hills blanketed with thick forest cover. It was a good place to hide. An animal trail snaking through a clearing made by a tumble of rocks caught her eye. A sunbeam flashed off a slash of polished metal. Some idiot had dropped a machete in the grass, maybe while running to get out of view. A nod of satisfaction was the only gesture she allowed herself. A quick survey showed the other 2 reeves of her triad, Tarnit and Ayar, flying north and south of her position, respectively. She quartered the area, focusing her attention on the trees that ringed the clearing, and glimpsed lines and shapes that might be huts or lean-tos so well hidden beneath the forest canopy that a reeve on regular patrol would never notice them. Leaves thrashed at the crown of a stately oak. They bent and rustled with too much weight for a bird. Someone was climbing. She rained terror to the right, just as an arrow spat out of the tree, shot by a desperate fool. The missile fell harmlessly back into the branches, and although she circled once, out of arrow range, she saw no sign of the archer. It was time to alert the troops. She noted her landmarks. Demon's Eye Peak to the south, a waterfall to the north, an ancient lady tree whose canopy marked an old way station concealed by forest cover, the clearing with the machete. By the dark clouds piling up in the east along the hills, it was going to storm soon. Like all reeves, she had 4 signal flags in her quiver. She signaled to the other reeves to remain over the area. Leaving them behind, she glided on an air current down to the staging point in the upper reaches of the valley of the river Elshar. From the air, the camp of the King's Spears had the efficient look of a place well guarded by sentries and easy to break down when we needed to move on. She thumped down a prudent distance from the tents. Even so, terror opened her beak and fluffed her feathers to make herself look even larger than she already was, as if the eagle were worried. These trifling soldiers wouldn't respect her. Danara hooded her and, stepping out of range of her talons, beckoned to the nearest soldier. The brawny young man had the look of the palace about him by the evidence of his curly black hair and a prominent nose not unlike her own. He hesitated before sauntering over, examining her as if surprised to see a woman with gray hair, dressed in reed leathers, and carrying a reed's baton just as if she were actually a reed. "I need to speak to Chief Tuvas immediately," she said. "Who are you to demand the chief come when you call?" he retorted with a sneer. "You reeves are meant to attend him, not the other way around." "I'm surprised a man who trained hard enough to gain the honor of serving in the king's elite spears is so unobservant that he hasn't noticed me consulting with Chief Tuvas the last few days. Not to mention the marshal's wings sewn right here on my vest in plain sight of your lazy eyes. Be quick about it," she added. His eyes opened wide as he took a step back, touching 2 fingers to his forehead in the sign used by worshippers of Delta to show obedience to the god. He muttered words that she didn't catch. She tapped the baton onto an open palm. He hustled away. It didn't take long for Chief Tuvas to stride up. He greeted her with proper respect, fist to chest. She shouldn't have cared that the young soldier who had been rude to her witnessed the gesture, but she did, and she was glad. "Marshal Danara, you must have news. I've spotted an encampment in the forest." When she finished her description, the chief nodded. "We'll strike at once." "They betrayed their position," she said, "so they'll run. The quicker they scatter, the more chance your reeves can follow them." She got back into the air and became the banner the soldiers tracked as they moved at speed up over the back ridge of the valley and into the wilderness beyond. The site was maybe 2 May distance, which they made in half the time ordinary folk would have taken to walk there. A cloudburst swept through but barely slowed the soldiers, although terror gave a few puffy chirps of displeasure. When the spears reached the area, they went in fast. The heavy tree cover hid the attack from her and wasn't her responsibility anyway. She circled, looking for any sign of people running away from the spear's attack. But she saw nothing. only a deer and a flap of wings from a disturbed bird. Her instinct for trouble tingled. For days, the estate prisoners had eluded them despite the advantage Reeves had in being able to track by air. It was clear they had help from disloyal elements within the local population, or worse, from the demons who were still trying to tear down the peaceful administration her father had set in place 60 years ago. She would never let the demons and their allies destroy her father's legacy. Never. On alert for a possible flanking attack or an as yet unseen escape route, she made a wide loop south over the hill called Demon's Eye Peak, because its flat crown had a demon's coil carved into the rock. It had been years since she had patrolled this area, but when she had become a Reed, her father had given her the special duty of locating as many demon coils as possible, since many were impossible to find unless you were flying. Cliff-like slopes protected the summit of Demon's Eye Peak, but from the air, the maze was easy to trace, a hexagonally shaped spiral etched into the rock around a central bowl-like depression. Its twisting lines resembled veins of gleaming copper, and from a height it appeared painted onto the ground. At the coil's center shimmered a pool of polished blue, like palest turquoise, that had something of the texture of water, even though no one actually knew what it was. No person could walk the maze, only demons could. She had tried once many years ago on a different coil and come within a handbreadth of dying when the coil had expelled her with a jolt that almost flung her over the side of a ledge. On this patrol, she'd not seen any demons or their winged horses, although she always watched for them. Yet she could not help wondering if it was merely a coincidence that the prisoners had taken cover so close to a demon's coil. Helping criminals escape the king's justice was exactly the sort of thing demons would do to destabilize the king's rule. She reined Terror back around for one last look at the coil, then glided down into a narrow spur of the Elshar Valley that tucked right up against Demon's Eye Peak and a neighboring hill. In this secluded vale lay a substantial estate whose forecourt overlooked the headwaters of the river Elshar. The main building with 2 wings and a tower marked it as the country estate of one of the Re-Amara clans, a secretive people who had immigrated into the Hundred about 5 generations ago, although most Hundred folk still thought of them as foreigners. She admired the extensive garden enclosed within walls as thick and high as those of a fortress. A woman walked out from the back portico of the house, spotted her, and ducked back inside in the usual way of Re-Amara women, who, according to their peculiar foreign customs, never bared their faces in public. As Danara turned Terror to head back, a flash caught her attention. She twisted in her harness in time to see 3 more spasms of light flare in a rhythmic pulse from Demon's Eye Peak. The hells! But when she flew back over the peak, it lay as quiescent as before, nothing to see except the faintly shining thread of the demon's coil embedded in rock, like a ribbon pressed into the earth. So that's the first one. And then I wanted to link that up. So she flies over the estate, and you see a woman, she sees a woman come out from the estate and then go back in. And that character's story is also, she's also a point of view character. Her name is Sarai. And she lives a very, I'll just quickly say that she lives a very isolated life on this estate. Most of her people live in the city where there are merchants and traders. Mm-hmm. And she finds a way, so she finds a way, I'm going to look at this. She finds a way, she thinks she's going to be living at this country estate for her whole life, and she finds a way to get out. Okay. Doing so means leaving everything behind. So she's I think 22 years old, and means leaving everything behind. And I'm going to read a very brief section about what she's leaving behind. Sarai lay awake under the covers as the other girls filtered into the dormitory with songs and giggles. At length, everyone settled down and the lamps were extinguished. She breathed into the darkness until the last whisper died away. A moon spark cooed outside. The soul bell rang to chase away night-walking evil spirits, a relic of the life the Ria Mara had escaped from in a distant land far away across a vast ocean that she would never see. At last, she judged it safe to creep barefoot out of the dormitory room and through the atrium to the side porch that led onto the kitchen courtyard. A single lantern burned by the gate. Slipping outside, she felt her way along a stone-paved path to the tomb east of the house. A lamp in the shape of a globe pierced with many holes burned at the entrance. She lifted it off its hook, and with its splintered light to guide her, went inside. The building was a miniature copy of the main compound. The Ria Mara believed that each burial vessel must be installed in its fitting place. The men in the men's hall, the women in the women's wing, unmarried girls in the girls' dormitory, and boys who had died before manhood in the anterooms of their father's suites. Small jars containing the bones of infants and stillborn babies were placed in the tiny forecourt, sad reminder of souls who had not fully entered the household. Fresh flowers wreathed every jar so their fragrance would sweeten the long silence. The remains of Sarai's mother had been placed within a stone ledge on the back portico, away from everyone else, under the roof as required by her birth, but alone as befit her shame. The large jar had a sealed mouth and no decoration, unlike all the others with their painted filigree and splashes of colorfully painted vines and ripe fruit to remind the grieving of the joys of life. Sarai brought a necklace of fresh flowers every week, but no one else did. Her mother's mirror was hung around the jar's waist in the proper way. The family could not take that courtesy away from her. She rested her forehead against the ceramic. Inside lay jumbled her mother's bones, dust in the dark of the grave. Her soul had flown to the hidden one's heart. The scent of flowers faded in the sleeping air like the last trace of her passage. The hard surface told Sarai nothing of her mother, just as the past was an opaque shell that sealed her mother away from her. We were well rid of her, Aunt Rua had once said when she hadn't known Sarai was close enough to overhear. They littered scraps of memory at Sarai's feet. Her mother Nadai had been vain, selfish, unkind, the girl who ruthlessly demands loyal obedience from the other girls her age and scorns and mocks the ones who refuse to follow her lead. Nadai's betrothal to the prestigious Aram elder of First Branch had been a triumph that she had flaunted in the faces of her less pretty and less fortunate cousins. She had warned them that she would be too busy in her new, prosperous life as the wife of the richest Ria Mara man in the 100 to communicate with those she left behind, and she had kept that promise. But Nadai had not left her daughter Sarai behind. She had fled her home with her daughter in her arms. "Mother," Sarai whispered, "I am leaving to make my own way just as you wished for me." Sarai did not believe souls could hear the voices of the living. They drowned in the light of the hidden one, awash in the brilliance of eternity. "But I wish I could see your face just once. It seems cruel. I don't remember it at all." Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. That was a really great juxtaposition of two very different characters, the one older person and a really young woman. I'm really interested in why you decided to create such a badass older woman, because you usually don't see someone who is in their 50s with the gray hair that you mentioned, who does all that kind of thing and is so, badass, basically.
I think that this is something I've talked about before, but I think one of the most overlooked characters in fiction in general are older women, because we kind of have a fixation in American culture anyway. I can't speak for other cultures. And I don't, but like, if I look at a TV show or a film in the US, we mostly see younger women portrayed. If I watch like a Danish mystery show. There's some Danish police shows that have been on recently that are really, really great. I see more older women portrayed as just, they may not be the main character, but they're important secondary characters, and they're working and they're doing stuff. And it seems like there's less of that in the United States, that, you know, once you get over 40, it's like, whatever, we're done with you. And because I've written fantasy and science fiction for so long, I see that in, you know, in my genre as well, that if, you know, there's, often it seems like women are there to be, well, let's be honest, there to be sex workers, or someone who gets married to somebody, or someone's girlfriend, or someone who's gonna, you know, die so that a man can feel bad or get, you know, need to get revenge, right? Mm-hmm. And if there's older women, they're often maybe a wise elder, or maybe they're a catty older woman who's jealous of youth. But I just don't see that many. I don't see that many great portrayals of women. And I'm older myself now. But B, I live in Hawaii. And in Hawaii, older women are, in the Polynesian culture, really, really respected. So I think those things all came together in writing this story, and I thought I'm going to make one of my main characters an older woman who's been doing her job for a long time, and you know, has a position of authority. So that's where she comes from.
Yeah,
and she's cranky because at this age.
Yeah, I mean, you get to a point where, you know, you just want to tell everybody, just do what I say, you know. But yeah, you're totally right. It is really refreshing, because there are thousands and millions of these kind of women who are older and really good at their jobs and have been doing their jobs for such a long time. And why aren't they portrayed in pop culture? Why don't you see them on TV or in books? You know. And another thing is, I just felt that there was a really great contrast between Sarai, the young girl, and Danara, that was her name, the older woman. And Sarai seems like, in contrast to Danara, like she's still unsure, and she still doesn't really know where she belongs, and that's why she's running away. Am I right?
Well, you know, no, she's not actually running away.
Okay,
but no, she makes something happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That allows her to get away. But one of the appeals of writing about younger people in this situation is that you get to see someone who isn't sure who they are, kind of discover who they are. What is their strength? What can they do that they didn't know they could do? And I love writing that journey. I think most of us go through it, and I think that's why it's so appealing.
Yeah.
It's a different journey from someone who's older, because oftentimes when we're older, we're kind of set in or maybe more set, our personalities maybe more set, maybe there's fewer, unless something from outside really changes our life, like there's a cataclysm, we don't maybe change as much. So there's each of those has different challenges and different interests. So I liked, and I really particularly like, there's a third female point of view character in Black Wolves who's younger. She's like about 17, 18 years old. And again, her situation's a little different, because she's someone who is perfectly happy where she is, and she's kind of like torn out of it. And so she resents that, as opposed to Sarai, who's like escaping. You know, she's like, get out of the situation I don't like. So those two characters are kind of contrasted. So, and then there's two male characters as well, who I am also very fond of, but I didn't read the male parts.
Okay. Well, I noticed that you do have like a very a diverse range of characters in your novels, because I've read like the Spirit Walker series, and there's quite a diverse range of characters there, not just in gender, but in race. I mean, or the way they look, or ethnicity, or the things that they do, the societal roles that they play. And I just, especially in the Spirit Walker series, I noticed that there was a lot of people playing societal roles that were not defined by their gender. Did you do that on purpose, or is it like an ideal that you just wish the world was like?
That people did what?
people playing roles in society or having jobs or just having roles in their community that were not defined by their gender. They were just there because they were the best person for the job, for example.
Yeah, with Spirit Walker, it is done on purpose. With Spirit Walker, I wanted to write an alternate history, and there is magic in it, so it doesn't really count as a straight alternate history. Like if this changed, you know, then that would be different. But I wanted to write a story that's kind of where you see a lot of the similar things from our own history, but in which the Northern European nations, the ones that colonized, like Germany and Britain and England and all those things, they never exist. They never develop. Those tribes never come into being. And then I was kind of, so for me it was kind of like a what if. So what if it was how would Europe develop? If it was, you know, many similar things. The Romans are still there, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, the Celtic tribes would never have been pushed to the margins and absorbed by the other Germanic tribes. And I thought, and the New World, what we call the New World here, Americas, the cultures of the Americas would have continued to develop as they were. And so I just tried to look at each of those different cultures and think, how would they behave differently if they hadn't been influenced by this whole Northern European colonial mindset, and by the Judeo-Christian or the Christian, the right Christianity. And it's a what if, it's a speculation of how that would have happened. And part of that is gender. You see some gender roles in the Roman society, and you see some gender roles in the Phoenician and the Celtic societies, but they're kind of different because they come out of different traditions. And the one example I would want to give is there's a lot of influence from West Africa and from the Mande culture and language area, because there was a huge migration in the story. There's a huge migration into Europe. And one of the things that's interesting is to see communities where the community talks about things, and the community, how will this impact the community as opposed to the individual? It was important to me to try to portray this idea of the community being as important as the individual, and that people identify as members of a community, not just as individuals, because that's a different mindset. So that's one of the things that science fiction and fantasy, as speculative fiction, is great with, is that you can think about these ideas and throw them out there and then kind of cycle them through your story. You don't have to tell the same story in the same way.
Yeah. Okay. Before I ask my next question, I just want to tell everybody who's watching that you can actually start typing in your questions right now, and once we have a few going, I'll read them out to Kate. Okay, so Kate, shall we talk about the latest book that you just came out with, Court of Fives? I'm really interested in that book because it has a young woman athlete. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, and it has a young woman athlete who's really serious about her sport. So, what inspired you to create a character like that?
I've always been athletic myself, and I need to say here, I don't write I don't write myself as the main character into my stories. I'll say things about me or things about my life that interest me or that have been important to me, and then I maybe will say I want to do something. But I just really wanted to write a story about a girl who was really serious about being good at athletics. Because you have to. It's not just competitiveness, but it's also this not wanting to lose. And the other element of it is that in fantasy novels in particular, but you also see it in science fiction, there is this kind of a thing where you see people who just were born with the special thing that I happen to be the greatest wizard who ever lived. I just happen to be that great, right? And it just needs to be unlocked or revealed to me, right? And I like that story because it makes me feel special. But I wanted to write a character who's good because she has worked so hard, because she is so determined, she's so disciplined, she's so focused that she creates. Of course, she has the ability, she has the talent, but the reason most people excel, the reason athletes or musicians who are at the top of their game, or anybody really, the reason they excel, the ones who work really hard to get there. And I wanted to write that character.
Well, yeah, you're totally right about, you know, suddenly you have this amazing power, and yes, you have to save the world, but you don't really see a lot of characters who train and train and train and work hard, but that's what real life is like. But
it's not maybe the most fantasy thing of all. I mean, it is nice to kind of just say, oh my God, goodness, I'm just so incredibly powerful. Where did that come from?
Yeah, exactly. Why is it though that you chose, do you make a conscious decision to make it a woman, a girl who has to train and be serious about sport? Because in culture nowadays, I feel that a lot of people feel that women's sports are kind of second fiddle to men's sports, and women are not really taken seriously as athletes. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's true. I was in junior high and high school. So I was a teenager during the 1970s. It was like a long time ago now. But in the United States, there was at that time, for instance, when I began as a sophomore in high school, the boys, of course, they had their basketball team and their football team and their track and field team and their baseball team, right? And the girls I think there was a girls track and field team, but we didn't even have a basketball team. We had like a basketball club. I've told this story before. We had a basketball club, which meant that it was like an intramural club. It wasn't official. There wasn't a league. We just kind of like practiced and then, played the other schools that were in the same league as the boys would have, but it wasn't anything real. And then in the United States, this act called Title IX was passed, and it mandated in law that you had to have equal opportunities for girls to boys in sports. And of course, it took many years to cycle through. But I was in high school when they put when the first elements of that got put in place. So literally, my sophomore year, we had a basketball club. We played one game against the other things, and that was nice. The second year, we had to have, for the first time in history in the state of Oregon, we had to have an official league. Wow. And we won it, got to be the league champion. We played, the same teams as the boys. Wow. And the third year, my senior year in high school, they had the first state tournaments for girls basketball. And our team, we won our league. So I played. We didn't do well, I'm sorry to say. But I played in the first state basketball tournament for high school girls. I mean, there was different size schools, right? So, but that has always influenced me, watching that change happen in my own life, where at the beginning, there was really almost nothing for girls. And at the end, they were saying, you know what, we have to give girls those chances. And I get so excited about this. I remember the first time I saw the finals of the women's college basketball broadcast on TV. I was stunned. This was in the 90s. I was like, oh my gosh, they're showing women college sports on TV. I couldn't believe it. So yeah, we still have a long way to go, and they often still don't get the respect men do, but it's just so different now. It's like day and night from when I was a girl. The opportunity for girls coming up now. And one last thing. It was said when I was a girl, people would say, well, women, girls don't really like to do sports. That's a boy thing. You know what? It's not true. Girls love to do sports too. Not every girl, just like not every boy likes to do sports, but those who do love it. And finally they have the chance.
Yeah, you're right, yeah. And do you think that now society in general is more accepting of female athletes, like Ronda Rousey, for example, who's so big right now, and she's so strong and she's so confident, and she's basically like the epitome of strong woman. Do you think female athletes in general are getting more accepted in society?
I think it's complicated, like you say. I think that, I mean, if you look at Serena Williams, who's probably one of the most, if not the most dominant sports person in the sport, in a sport right now, you know, she certainly gets a lot of respect, but she also gets a lot of criticism in ways that men don't necessarily get. And so I think it's complex. I think women are now really perceived as perceived with respect in a way they weren't before. And I just want to quickly mention the Court of Fives. I sometimes call my pitch line for Court of Fives is Little Women Meet American Ninja Warrior in a fantasy setting inspired by ancient Egypt. But I want to quickly talk about American Ninja Warrior, which is a TV show in the U.S., which is where they stole from Sasuke, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, the Japanese show, which is basically just a big obstacle course. But I love it. But one of the things I love about it is that women can be completely the same as men. And because only one person at a time is on the court, basically you're cheering. The whole point is you're cheering for the person to complete the course. You're not cheering for one person to win and one person to lose. And you see the competitors in the audience cheering just as much for the women as for the men. They just want people to succeed. And that's really exciting for me to see that, because I don't know, it just, no one ever says, why are those women doing that? They go, oh, look at them, this is so great, right?
Yeah,
so I love that.
Yeah, okay. All right, now we've been talking about being strong and girls and women who are strong and athletes and everything. Can you just tell me what your definition of strong female character is?
Oh, that's such a good question. Thank you. My definition of a strong female character is any girl or woman who finds even some small way to be true to herself and what she needs to do. And it could, I never want to limit rank to things that we have often in different cultures and historically associated with male roles. So if a woman can only be strong if she picks up a sword, then we're only saying that male ideas or how we, you know, that male traits matter. But women can be strong in so many ways. Women can be strong by enduring abusive marriages for years for the sake of their children or because their society doesn't give them any way to get out of them. Women can be strong by cooking for hundreds of people. Women can be strong by you know, making a home for years. Women can be strong in so many different ways by and those stories, the stories of what women have historically done, are often kind of left out. It's like, well, those aren't important, those are trivial. But to me, all these women who have lived as well as they could, and often under constraints, those to me are all strong women, and those are all stories that we can tell. In the Black Wolves is set in the same universe as my Crossroads trilogy. And I deliberately, in the Crossroads trilogy, the main character in that story over the course of the 3 books is a young woman named Mai. And she doesn't wield a sword. She's not kick-ass. But she's in that way. But she's an incredibly strong character because she uses her ability to see connections between people and to build a community as a way to create a position of connection and strength for herself when she comes into a new country. And to me, she's the epitome of a strong female character, even though she never does, you know, things that we identify as male things.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was a really good answer. I think a lot of people also have this idea that you're strong when you you go around beating people up and killing the bad guy, but that's not all it is it? Okay, we have a question from the audience. Paul Weimer is asking. He says, Kate, I didn't know you back at the time of the Crossroads novels came out, so I never got to ask you until now. What was the genesis or seed idea of the Eagles and Reeve Society that the new readers can now see in Black Wolves?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for that question. I wrote about this on John Scalzi's blog years ago. So when Crossroads came out, which would have been, oh my gosh, that's like 8 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long. Anyway, the Reeves are not my idea. I always am happy to steal ideas that my family has. And so sometimes my kids and sometimes my husband, before he became an archaeologist, my husband's an archaeologist now, but before he became an archaeologist, he was a police officer. And I guess for a long time, he had this, and he used to read fantasy. He doesn't have time to read fiction anymore. But he had this idea of Reeves who would get around on eagles because he thought that was like a really cool fantasy idea. So I stole it from him. Just stole it from him. And the change I made was that I think he thought of it as like an Arthur Rackham, you know, the Arthur Rackham, the artist and illustrator. He would like have these, my husband loves his work, his paintings, and it would often be like fairies and gnomes and stuff. And he might have like someone, you know, a little person, a little knight with a little jousting lance sitting on the back of a bird, right, at the sparrow. So he imagined the people sitting on the backs of the eagles. But I thought, you know, if these people are patrolling, you're going to be, first of all, you're not going to sit on their back because you can't see anything. You can only see off to either side. So they're going to rig it so like you'll be hang gliding, right? So you'll be like a little hang glider because then you can see everything and the eagle's above you. So that was the change I made. And then I set up a whole structure of how it would work in this country if you had people who were patrolling like that and how they would get around. And the life cycle of how Reeves and eagles work together and what kind of connection there was and whether there's like a psychic connection or not. So that's where they come from.
All right. Just out of curiosity, did your husband say anything about you stealing his idea?
I think he was first a little taken aback that I changed the way that they were harnessed, but then he realized that I was right.
Okay, of course. Okay.
He doesn't always say that, but
it's obvious that you're right. Okay, we have another question from the audience from Rachel Wallace. Rachel says, I loved getting to read another story about Mai in your short story collection. Will the new trilogy give any hints as to what her life was or is like since the events of Crossroads?
Thank you, Rachel. And yes. Yes. She's not a point of view character. But yes.
Okay.
This is, and I want to say for people who haven't read Crossroads, this is a completely separate trilogy. You don't have to have read Crossroads. I deliberately wrote it to be a standalone trilogy, and it's written to introduce you to the world quickly without any info dumping. But if you've read Crossroads, you will notice things that yeah. I don't know how else to. Anyway, so it's a complete thing. But yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll find out more.
Yeah, exactly. We'll find out more when we get the book.
It would be a spoiler to say any more than that.
Yeah. Okay. Now you've written a lot of science fiction fantasy novels. I mean that is your genre, right? But these this is still quite a male dominated area. So but there are a lot of female characters being written nowadays, and it probably started with Hermione Granger, and it becomes such a big thing nowadays to have a female protagonist at the forefront. Do you think that contemporary audiences in these genres are more accepting of female protagonists nowadays?
You know, I think that the rise of urban fantasy as a genre and the rise of young adult as a genre has changed that a lot. Um, it, it can be traced to partly to, I'm not good about the history of how this, but I know Laurel Hamilton wrote a lot of very popular urban fantasy, but I tend to trace it to Buffy,
Yeah.
the TV show. Because to me, that TV show did a good job of juggling this idea of she's just a girl, but she's also the vampire slayer.
Mhm.
And also go to things like Twilight, which this rise of young adult novels which center girls as in many, not all of them, but in many of them, and in urban fantasy. So even though there's plenty of men writing young adult and plenty of men writing urban fantasy with male characters,
Yeah.
I think that it's easier to place women in the center of young adult and urban fantasy than it is maybe still in science fiction and epic fantasy, which is still a little more guy-centered right now. And partly I think that's because a lot of new writers, a lot of new women writers, I see them debuting in young adult and in urban fantasy because I think those genres I think are a little friendlier to women. So I do think it's better. I do think we see women and girls more often. I do think that I see more criticism of those characters. Oh, they're just wish fulfillment. That I don't. You can have a guy character, right, and he can like be a polymath, or he can be a, like pick up a sword and 6 months later he's the best in the world, right? But they never say that's wish fulfillment. It's like people who say, well, I didn't believe in this woman warrior character because she was so unrealistic. She was just like Conan in a bra. And I'm thinking like, and Conan is realistic, right?
Yeah.
But no one ever says Conan is, we get that Conan is wish fulfillment, right? But I don't know. I don't see that criticized. So I think we still have some way to go to let. And I still don't see. I still see the again the strong female character thing that you said, where we praise women more. I think for doing things that were formerly associated with the masculine. Although I don't see gender in that binary way, but anyway, we're moving. I hope we're moving.
Yeah. Well, like you were saying, there are still people who try to stick to this traditional science, fantasy especially, this traditional way of writing things where, like, and they use, for example, they use Tolkien as a baseline. This is how fantasy should be, and we can't accept all these other newfangled characters with female characters or gender fluid characters, things like that. What do you think about that? I feel that fantasy can be anything you want.
How do I feel? How do I feel about?
Well, you were saying that you just briefly mentioned it's still like that in fantasy, in like this epic fantasy. Yeah. So do you think that's changing slowly, or it can be changed, or are these people, too strong for us to change them?
Okay, so I have two. I'll try to make this short, which is why I write long epic fantasy novels. I think there's two things going on. One is just a marketing thing that the perception that young adult is focused on girls and women, and that many of the best-selling authors are women. Kind of drives people to that for the one thing, but on the other side, something that I see in epic fantasy in particular, and I'm seeing it less now, more people are pushing back on it, but I do see people saying things like, well, we can't write this, we can't write women in major roles because back in those days, women never did anything, and they, but it's not true. First, there's the one argument made, which is like you can have dragons, but you can't have women doing active things, right?
Yeah.
So that's one argument. But the other argument is it's not even true. If you look at history, oddly enough, women have been doing things throughout history over and over and over again, things that we don't expect and things that history just leaves out. I was reading a story about, there's a story in my short story collection, just called The Very Best of Chaotic, because it's all my short fiction. So anyway, with this beautiful Julie Dillon cover. Anyway, there's a story in there called The Queen's Garden, and it's set in a secondary world, a world I made up. Well, and it's about two sisters who are princesses, and one of the sisters runs a hospital, and this is set in, and I just took that because of reading about, I believe, a Khmer queen or princess who, like 800 years ago, founded a hospital for the public. Mm-hmm. We don't hear about that unless we go digging.
Yeah.
We can hear about the men who founded the first hospital in Paris or wherever, I don't know where it was. But anyway, but do we hear about that? No. So we say women didn't do anything, but they were doing things.
Yeah, they were doing things. Yeah. So yes. Yeah. Okay. So we have a question from Regina. Or we had a question, but it seems to have disappeared. But I think I remember what she asked. She was asking, do you think the science fiction and fantasy is more accepting of female authors and nowadays? What do you think? And you're basically a female author in a kind of boys club. So what is that like for you?
Well, it's interesting. I think back when I broke in, my first novel was published in 1988, and I think in the 80s and through the 90s, I saw a lot of women debuting in fantasy and science fiction. And then, as I said, with the rise of urban fantasy and young adult, I see a lot more young and or new women writers debuting in those fields, and maybe fewer. I don't know. I may be wrong, but I feel like I see fewer debuting in, regular fantasy and science fiction now. Mm. And I see some conversation. You still see people say things like women don't write science fiction or women don't write epic fantasy. I mean, I see it still. It's like, are we invisible?
Yeah. Well, I guess people are selective, they go for what they know and they go for what they think they like, and they don't explore further. So they don't know that there are so many different kinds of authors writing about different things, and yeah, there's just so much out there. You just have to explore.
Well, and then one of the things that happens is that you'll see people, I see this all the time, you'll see people who say, well, I'm going to tell, what are the last 5 books you read? And so you'll get somebody, so if the last 5 books this guy read are by other guys, that's fine, that's honest. But if you see this pattern over and over again, you realize that they're just not, I don't think that these guys are sexist. I think that they're just not picking stuff up. They're just reading the same things, that are like them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pattern that creates invisibility, makes it hard for a woman to, for instance, to break in, or makes it hard for women to maintain careers. If they're not getting kind of the same, hey, look at this, or I just read that. So, and that's something that that's something that the field is still struggling with, I think.
Yeah, right. We have another question from Rachel. And she says she's asking if more than one question is okay. Yes, Rachel, you can ask as many questions as you like. So Rachel is asking, on an older book, I've just been curious as to whether or not the Jaren keep pets.
Keep pets. Thank you, Rachel, because they keep pets. You know what? I'm gonna say no, because they're nomadic. They're step pastoral. So in their no, because every animal they would have would be a working animal and not be seen as a pet. Now, what would happen later when I get to the later books that aren't written yet, when some parts of the society change from that would be different. But no, all their animals are working animals.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I found Regina's question from before, and she actually asked, Do you think urban fantasy and young adult are so female friendly, both to women writers and female protagonists, because they are spaces that are especially conducive to telling female stories and sharing female life experiences?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I think I think okay, so I think all stories are conducive to telling female stories and sharing female life experiences. But I think that you're right in perhaps suggesting that some spaces and platforms historically and culturally have kind of pushed those to one side and said that we don't need to talk about these, we only need to talk about the men, and the women's stories are kind of secondary, or they support the male stories. And as long as you enter any kind of space or platform with that idea, it's going to be hard to tell female stories. Um, and because urban fantasy and young adult never have been shy since they became genres, like marketing genres, because they haven't been shy about saying, hey, I'm going to tell this story about this girl or this woman. That then creates, it's like a circular argument. It creates a place, a space where you can tell that story and people will accept it. And I think it's one reason they've become so popular and sold so well with all the ups and downs of publishing is because I think people are looking for those stories that they can't always find elsewhere. You know, when you haven't had your story told, for whatever reason, it might be gender, it might be race, it might be it might be sexual orientation, it might be religion. If you haven't found stories that reflect your experience, when you find them, it's so exciting, and it's something that you then want to share and maybe want to tell yourself. I think it's empowering.
Okay, now speaking of being empowered, I've noticed that there is this really refreshing kind of open-minded attitude to sexuality, like your own sexuality and sex among the young women characters in your stories. Like I said, I read the Spirit Walker trilogy, and you can see that they're very in control of their own bodies, and they make decisions on what they want to do. So did you incorporate that? Was it a conscious decision when you wrote that in?
You know what? I did, because the Crossroads trilogy, and I won't go into any detail. One of the things with the Crossroads trilogy is a very kind of a grim story, because I wanted to deal with the consequences of war, but I wanted to deal with it from the point of view of many people. But I wanted to show victims, show how they survived and how they dealt with things, not just use them as a lot of times when we talk about abuse and violence against women and rape in stories, we often see those stories, they're really told to support the male story. You know, so these things happen to this woman, but he's a good guy because he helped her, or he's getting revenge because his wife was killed, right? So, but I wanted to show that what happens to these people, and especially women, what happened to them? How do they recover their lives? How do they keep going? And so I wrote, so there's a lot of that in the Crossroads trilogy, and in many ways, there's some aspects of it that are very hard to read, I think, because I wanted to deal with pain, and I wanted to deal with strength, the strength it takes for women to keep going and for people to keep going. But having written 3 books where I dealt with that as part of it, it's not the main part of it, but it's part of it. When I got to Spirit Walker, I said, you know what? I want to write something completely different. I want to write a story which is about these young women and how they own their own sexuality and how they feel confident and how they can just move forward in the world feeling that they don't owe anything to anybody in that sense, or that they aren't. I didn't want to deal with pain and abuse in their stories. I wanted them to own their sexuality and be strong in that way and have that opportunity. Because I think that's an important story to tell too.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I see a lot of it may not really be related to what you just said, but in geek culture, there's there's a huge female audience, for all these sci-fi and fantasy, and there's so many female geeks, but there are still a lot of critics that say that it's too male dominated. Even despite of there's also a number of well-respected and up-and-coming female authors, So what do you think should be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's books or comics or gaming, more welcoming for women and girls? So, yeah.
I think it's important to center women's stories, to treat women's and girls' stories as if they are important, and to not. And the other thing I think that it's super, super important to do, and I would implore any teachers and parents and librarians and anybody watching this, is don't tell boys not to read that story because it's about a girl. Stories about girls are for people. They're for children. They're not for boys or for girls. Stories, there aren't like boy stories and girl stories. There should be stories about people who are like, if we're talking about children's stories, about coming of age stories, or whatever. I mean, we shouldn't. These stories should be for everyone. And as long as we say that a story that centers a girl is only going to interest girls, we're still perpetuating that. If you see what I mean. So the more we can say that these stories, that we can all share these stories, I think that's the way forward.
I totally get what you mean. It's just human stories should be shared by all humans, right?
Well, it's actually to mention the Spirit Walker. I thought there was this great review by a young man who read Cold Magic, and I love the review because it's really honest. And at one point in the review, he says, "Well, I started reading this book, and it kind of took me back because it was like from the point of view of a 19-year-old girl." And I thought, as a 28-year-old guy supposed to be able to identify with a 19-year-old girl viewpoint? And then I loved that because that was honest. And then the great thing is then he goes, and it was a great story. I really liked it. And I convinced some male friends of mine to read it. And I thought, see, that's what I want. Yeah. As women, we read stories about men all the time. It's assumed that will be of interest to us, right? Because men, those stories are interesting. So now we can make, so that's part of my goal. Make all these stories interesting to everyone.
And I'm sure that man who reviewed your story could identify something in the character or something that she went through, that he went through when he was 19. So that's what you want, right?
Exactly, because there are actually there's almost always something we can find in any character that reflects something, however small, in our own experience. Because we're all human. We're human first.
Oh, we have another question from the audience. Athena Foster asks, would you be willing to talk about some of the things that influenced your decision to publish under a new name, and would you make the same choice today?
Thank you, Athena. I didn't. The situation, I started publishing under a pen name. So my first 4 novels were published under my actual name. And then in 1990 was one of the, publishing has these kind of like rises and falls, crashes and things. And the publisher I was with at that time had cut a number of authors, and I was one of the ones who was cut. And my then agent said to me, well, this could be it for you. It's how it is. You've had your 4 novels, maybe that's whatever, could be years before you ever get published again. As it happened, it was 2 years. But I had a novel which I rewrote, and this was the novel Geron. And it went to, we gave it to another publisher, and they loved it. And they said, we would really like to publish this. Now, back in the day, before Amazon, I know that it's like the Paleolithic and impossible to imagine that, where you couldn't order online because they didn't really, the World Wide Web didn't exist the way it is now. You would go into bookstores, and Barnes & Noble and Borders and Walden's and all those places ordered through a computer. And so my new publisher said, well, you know, your old books didn't do very well, and you were kind of like the low on the list of theirs. You were like the 5th author of the 5 that they published. Well, we want to make your new book, Duran, we want to make it our lead title. But when we go to place orders, when the bookstores go to place orders, they're going to look at your old numbers, and they're going to say, well, we can only order as many as you sold last time. And so even if we say, so the publisher says to me, even if we say to them, oh my gosh, but this is going to be our lead title, we're really pushing it, they'll still say, oh, we have to order by the numbers. So in order to get around the numbers, we would like you to take a pen name and keep it totally secret. This was back in the day. We'd keep it totally secret, which you could do then. Mm-hmm. And then they'll order according to the higher numbers, right? Because they won't know. And so I said, okay, because I didn't really care whether my name, I didn't really care. I just wanted my book to be published. So I wouldn't do anything different with that. I would do the same thing today. People take pen names today, but it's so different because it's almost impossible to keep it secret, as we saw with J.K. Rowling, who did her best. If anyone could have kept it secret, J.K. Rowling taking on a male pen name to do that new mystery series could have done it, and yet it still got out because the web, it's just impossible. But I would absolutely do the same thing now as then, because it gave me it gave me a new life as a writer. Because Duran did do well; it did considerably better than my first books, and it made it possible for me to continue on with the career I have now. The only other different decision I might make then would be whether I would take a male pen name instead of Kate Elliott, which is so clearly female. Would my career trajectory have been different if I had written under epic fantasy under a male name and people had thought I was a man? I don't know that, and I often wonder, but the flip side of that is that more women writers tell me that I was a big influence on them and that I was an inspiration for them because they saw a woman writing epic fantasy. And so if someone had told me then, you can either, which are you going to choose? You'll sell better under a male name, which may or may not have happened. We'll never know that, or you can have this and know that you're influencing women. I think I would take the influence. I'm glad that I was there for them. To me, that's really important because, eventually the evidence suggests that I am going to die. I know it's a hard thing for me to cope with, but the evidence suggests that, and that at some point my book production will end. But the thing is with generations is it kind of never, in a way, if your influence has carried on with someone else and then they influence someone else, there's that connection back, all the way back. And maybe I think that way because as a woman, I see that it's our connections that link us. So that's important to me. So I would make all the same choices today.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, speaking of influence, how do you think that authors like yourself can support efforts to keep up social change and in gender violence, in violence against women?
I think that we can support organizations like this who are doing the work on the ground. I think that we can, I think we can think about these subjects when we write fiction. And by that, I don't mean write message fiction, but I mean think about how these things influence people really in real life. Mm-hmm. Because in terms of how does a culture allow it to go on? There are cultures in which it's simply accepted that violence against women is accepted. It's considered something that's normal. And then there are cultures that say this is wrong. So I think as writers, and I can only really speak as a writer to this, as writers, we can think about how that influences the kind of story we want to tell and how we want to portray society. So, and this is a very serious issue. I want to talk briefly, if you don't mind, about the portrayal of rape in fiction and narrative. And often it's portrayed in a way that we're supposed to be taking the perspective of the person inflicting violence. And we can think about, is that the perspective we want to show people?
Mm-hmm.
We want to say, and the victims are often disposable. And as a writer, I can say, is that the perspective I want to show? Do I want to show that a person has a life beyond this incident, and that a person, has to do, we can choose what perspectives we take. And I think that is a really, really crucial part of fighting the violence against women and helping it, bringing about a change in perspective so that we can hope to end it.
You have been very supportive of us, of the Pixel Project and the Read for Pixels campaign by doing this and by donating all the awesome stuff that you've donated. Just tell us why you are supporting the cause. Why should you think this should end, and violence against women should end?
I think girls and women should be able to live without being abused. I think that should be a fundamental human right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that living without fear of abuse, education, healthcare, I think these things ought to be fundamental human rights, and we have to work to make them happen for everyone.
Right. Yeah, totally. Okay.
I don't really I feel really strongly about that, so.
Yeah, no, which is great because I mean, you're totally right. Women are human, and there are some people, the people who perpetuate the violence or who do the violence, maybe they see the women they're abusing as less than them or less than human. Maybe that's why it happens. But but we have to see women, as equal.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I think,
I mean, there's a lot of times and places and attitudes that think that women are inferior to men, but it's not true.
Yeah.
And until we have to change attitudes to make things change.
Do you think that society is sort of slowly moving towards that point where there is complete gender equality in every way, and so which then means that there will not be violence against somebody just because of their gender?
Well, I think that there will always be, I think human beings are complicated creatures. And I think that we have the capacity, I think that like as part of our fundamental human nature, we have the capacity for altruism. And I think we have the capacity for violence. We have the capacity to do good, and we have the capacity to do evil. So I do think that it's likely that there will always be violence, just as there will always be altruism in human interaction. It's hard to predict the future because things go up and down. I would hope that we can slowly but surely rid ourselves of the violence that's directed because people have set up these hierarchies. Humans are also very hierarchical, and I don't know if we're ever going to get beyond that. But to say that I can abuse this person because they're lesser than me, because they're a woman, or because they're, of their skin color, or because of their religion, or their sexual orientation. It's at least we're talking about it now. It still goes on, but at least we're talking about it openly. And before, I think either people just didn't think about it, or they wouldn't talk about it. So I have hope. I think hope is, and determination. And you guys, look what you guys are doing. Every time that you guys who are putting in all this volunteer work on projects like this, these are all like little steps, and each step adds up. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I mean, you're supporting us as well, and you're doing this for nothing and for the cause. You're helping us spread the word, which is great. And without people like you, we couldn't reach as big an audience as we are reaching right now. Okay, so I think we've run out of questions. Everyone's asked their questions, and I've asked most of my questions. So now I am going to tell the audience how they can get their hands on the goodies that you've donated again. So here we are. Okay, first of all, let me tell you what Kate has donated. So the first thing is there are two Drabbles up for grabs. Uh, Drabbles that Kate will write based on your prompt. Each donor gets one Drabble, and they get to choose which of Kate's worlds the Drabble will be set in. Second thing is a 1,000 word piece of flash fiction that Kate will write, and you will also get to choose which of Kate's worlds it will be set in. Third thing is a signed first edition hardcover copy of Kate's new young adult book, Quarter Fives, which she showed us just now. And Kate did donate advanced reader's copy of Black Wolves, which is her upcoming epic fantasy that she just read from, but that one has already been snapped up, unfortunately. But
I'm gonna make, I don't know how many people are here right now or how many people will be here later, but I have one other copy, which I will sign and send for whatever it was for $50 before. If anybody, so this is up for grabs.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you. Okay, so now we have another one. We have another signed, personalized copy of Black Wolves from Kate Elliott for you to snap up. So
it has a little crease here on the corner, though. I just have to warn you with a little.
It's
but
okay.
And actually, there are very few of these. They didn't print very many of these, so it's kind of a collector's item.
Oh, there you go. See?
I have that, yeah, the Advanced Big Alley stuff.
Okay, so now let me just tell you how you can get your hands on these things. So here are a few. There, can you see that? Okay, so here are a few links. All you have to do is go to our Indiegogo page, which is is.gd/r4p Indiegogo 2015, and choose the goodie that you want and donate the amount that is stated there, and you'll get your hands on it. If you don't have if you only have PayPal, you don't have a credit card, you can still help us and donate. You can go to is.gd/r4p Razoo 2015, where you can get a set of exclusive Read for Pixels wallpaper for your laptop, your tablet, your smartphone. So please do go and find things and give generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign, which will help end violence against women. If you want to know more about the Read for Pixel sessions or the other Google Hangouts that are coming up, you can go to is.gd/read4pixels, and the whole list is there. Okay, so all that remains now is for me to thank everybody. Thank you so much, Kate, for being with us and for sharing your thoughts and answering all our questions. Thank you guys, all of you guys out there who asked questions and who watched. If you want to watch it again, it's on YouTube. You can go find the YouTube video over there. Yeah, so if you want to find out more about violence against women, what you can do about it, about the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign, go to reveal.thepixelproject.net. And I wish you all a good day or a good night wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for being with us. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.